Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be knitting the basic spring top. It's super easy to knit and beginner friendly, but you need to know some basic stitches. You need to know how to cast on, how to knit, and how to bind off. It's extremely basic, so if you can make a scarf, you can make this. But if you need help, please refer to my YouTube channel on the knitting section for tutorials on how to do this. The pattern was reaching for many sizes, extra small all the way to 5S, and in this video I will show you how to make the small version. I use the cotton bamboo yarn by Lion Brand, which is a lightweight or number 3. For the needles I use a 4mm or US number 6. But please make sure to check your gauge because you might need to change your needles to according to gauge. It's very important that you check gauge because this is a garment and you want to make sure it fits you. Let's start by casting out our stitches, and I am using the long tail cast on. And the amount of stitches that you will need to cast on will be different for each and every size. The bigger the size, the more stitches you will need to cast on. I am making the size small, and please refer to the reaching pattern so you can know how many stitches you need to cast on depending on the size you choose to make. And don't worry, it's a free pattern that you can find at craftytools.com. After you cast on all your stitches, you just have to knit each and every single stitch in this round. in this row. And then you will have to repeat this for 96 rows. Just knit all the way, very easy. And as I said, it's a beginner friendly project. You will need to knit the 96 row for all sizes. But if you want to make this top shorter or longer, you just have to knit less rows or more rows. It's very easy to adapt because they're just knit stitches. There are not any shaping or there's not a special repeat to follow other than knit every single stitch. But if you do this, remember to take notes because you don't want to make it different. Here I finished all my 96 rows. It should look something like this, a rectangle or a square. As I said, no shaping. And now we're gonna make the armholes. For this, we have to bind off the first 9 stitches. To bind off, let's knit the first 2 stitches. Then grab the first stitch and pass it over the second one. You are then closing the stitches or binding them off. After you are done, just repeat it 8 more times to have 9 bind off stitches. And this is the same for every single size. It might look a little bit small for an armhole, but you will also have the front and back pieces. So it's gonna have enough room for arms. But again, as you can see, it's so simple that you can adapt it to your own needs by binding off more stitches or even less stitches. Just remember to take notes if you're going to do any modifications because you need to make a front and back piece that are an exact match. So here I have all my bound off stitches, 9 of them, and now I need to knit all the way to the end. See, super easy. Just knit all the way to the end. Once you finish that row, then you need to create the armhole for the opposite side. And you're going to do the exact same thing. So here is the armhole that we already shaped. I need all my stitches to the end, and now we're going to bind off 9 more stitches. Remember that if you did any modifications, you will have to repeat that here. Knit the first 2 stitches, pass over the first, and you have bind off. Knit the next one, pass it over, 2 stitches bind off, and just keep going until you bind off 9 stitches. Just like on the previous row, once we're done, we have to knit all the way to the end, and from there on just knit every single row for the amount of rows that the written pattern calls for your size. The bigger the size, the more rows you will need, because you will need a bigger space to let your arm through. So here I needed all my rows that the pattern calls for my size, and I'm going to be binding off again more stitches, and this one is going to be different for each size, and that is going to create our shoulder, and we will have to seam that afterwards. For this extra small size is 4 stitches to bind off. For the small size is 8, and so on. It keeps growing according to the size. And this will be just like we did with the armhole shaping. Just bind off the stitches, and once you're done, you have to knit to the end and then repeat it on the opposite side. The opposite side, you will have to start again by binding off stitches, and it will be the same number that you're binding off right now, but of course it will be different for each size. So let's get, those are my bind off stitches. I finished knitting my row, and now I have to bind off 8 more stitches for my size. It was 4 stitches for the extra small, but again it's going to be different for each and single size. So here you need to bind off all your stitches, and just as before, once you're done binding off your stitches, you have to knit all the way until the end. Once you're done, you will have to knit for 14 more rows, and this will be the same for each and every size, and this is what is going to form the turtleneck. The turtleneck is going to look a little bit big once you're knitting it, but remember that this will have to be folded over. Here you can see, but since we will have to fold over, it's actually just half of the size that is going to show. After working your 14 more rows, then you will have to bind off all remaining stitches. And we are almost done with our first piece. Once you are done with this piece, you need to start all the way from the beginning of the instructions to the end and create a second piece for your back, and it has to be exactly the same. Once you finish both pieces, front and back, you will need to wet block it and extend your stitches. Here I have both pieces, they have already been wet blocked, and I have to sew here. This is our armhole, so no sewing there, and again sewing right here on the edges. And of course you're going to have to repeat that on the opposite side. Here I left long tails when I finish my pieces, so I can use those to sew it together. I am using a tapestry needle, and I am using the mattress stitch to sew my pieces together, but you can also use a very easy method that is called the whip stitch. Just any way that you prefer to join your pieces and sew them together. If you own a serger or a sewing machine, you can also try those if you're good with them, but usually hand sewing is your best option. If you know how to crochet, you can also crochet together both pieces and maybe crochet a row of slip stitches or single crochet stitches. Here's how it's looking by putting them together. And as I said, you can also just use a whip stitch like this. For that, you just go over and over from each side, but I am using the mattress stitch, so I'll go back to it. And that's all there is to it. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you make it, please share it with me on social media. You can use the hashtag CraftyToots.